All right, let's spend one more lesson on the unstack method, and in this lesson I'll show you how you can unstack by multiple levels, which basically means migrating more than one of the layers in a multi-index to the columns axis. So I'll begin by executing our code from the previous lesson. I've also included that command, the stack method, to create a series here with a 3-level multi-index, and it's stored in S, and there the head method is giving us the first 3 rows. So in the past, we've just been calling the unstack method on our multi-index object, and we've basically been giving it an argument for this level parameter, and we've been giving it everything from numeric numbers, integers, positive numbers, negative numbers. We've also given it the name of the specific layer in the index that we wanted to move. Well, as it turns out, yet another argument that we can provide here is actually a list, and that list can again include either the index positions of the layers that I want to move or their names. So for example, I'm just going to write level out explicitly here and kick off my list with the square brackets. As I mentioned, this most outer layer of country is going to have an index position of 0, then year is going to have an index position of 1, and then this last inner layer of the multi-index, which doesn't have a name, is going to have an index position of 2. So for example, if I wanted to take the year here and move it out and unstack it and have it be the top level of my column multi-index, and afterwards I also wanted to include the country. So I basically want to take this year component, stack it, then take my country component and stack it. What I can do is basically write my index position, which is 1, which is going to refer to year, comma 0, which is going to refer to country, and I'm going to provide that as a list. So now when I execute this, it's going to take those 2 layers and move them here. You can see that the outer layer is my year. That's because I specified 1 as my very first argument. And then my second level, or my second layer in my column-based multi-index, is that country. Now keep in mind, if I were to reverse this order, if I was to do 0 and 1, which basically means country first, then year, then predictably the result would look slightly different. We're going to have the country as the most outer layer of my column multi-index, followed by the year index, and that's the next step that's been moved over here. And predictably, you're not simply limited to index positions. So if I wanted to, let's say, emulate this one, but do it with strings, I could simply write country, which is my outer layer right here. It's called country, and then write year. And what it's going to do is first move the country index level to be the top level of my column index, and then move the year to be that second level of my column multi-index. So predictably, that's going to give me the same result. And if I just reverse this to year and country, oops, there goes my cursor, you can see that year is going to appear as the most outer layer of my column-based multi-index, followed by the country. There's one other option that I want to show you, given that I was showing you the parameter options here, and we didn't discuss this fill value parameter here. So if we call the unstack method, let's say right here, and we just provide year, many times you're going to have things like null values here. That basically means that for certain sections in the data set, the data doesn't exist. So for something like Albania, if I scroll here to the right, you'll see that we have data for 2006, for example, and all these years. But we don't have data for these columns, the columns that represent years like 1960 and 1961. But we do have valid data for countries like Afghanistan and Algeria for that data. And in order to maintain this data frame's composition in terms of its column names, Pandas basically has to stick these cells in there and give them these NaN or null or missing values in order to kind of compose this consistent structure. So what we can do is provide an argument to that fill value parameter, and that's predictably just going to be the value that's going to be populated instead of a null value. So for example, if we wanted to replace all the nulls here with 0, which basically indicates, we don't know, let's say, I can just put in 0, and that's simply going to render me that data frame with zeros replacing those null values. Keep in mind, again, that this parameter, or this method rather, unstack, does not include any kind of in-place parameter. So it's not going to modify the original object that it's called upon. So if you do want to overwrite it, you do have to reassign back. That's the other caveat here. You do have to reassign back to the original variable. So if I'm starting with my S series and I now want S to store this final data frame that's been stacked and configured in the way I want it, I do have to store it back in S with the equal sign, and then finally S will be exactly what I want. So that's the unstack method, which again continues moving something from an index. It doesn't have to be a multi-index, by the way, as we showed in the last lesson, but it moves something from the row-based index, the main index as I like to call it, to the columns-based index. And as you can see, there's a wide variety of options, a wide choice of parameter arguments that we can give in order to modify how that operation is conducted.